In this video today, I'm going to tell you 8 unknown or less known facts about Middle Eastern fragrance brands, or what we nowadays a lot of us call Middle Eastern clone brands. But before I do, you know that I'm George, the nice medic gentleman, and it's time for your daily dose of some fragrance content. Let's start with a fun fact that has to do with history. A lot of people think that Middle Eastern brands, Middle Eastern clone brands as we call it, have been calling them lately, are actually something pretty new and have been created in the past few years. But the reality is that a lot of the major brands in the Middle East actually have a lot of heritage and a lot of history. For example, the brand of Ajmal has been around since 1950, so it's more than half a century old. Also, brands like Rasasi and Al Haramain, they have been created in the late 1960s and early 1970s. So those brands already have over half a century of history. And even Latafa, which is probably the most famous, the most recognizable name from the Middle East, fragrance name from the Middle East currently, that brand is also quite old nowadays. Latafa has been created in the 1980s, so even Latafa have almost half a century of history behind them. And recently I stumbled upon a brand called Surati, which is pretty unknown, but that brand has been created in the 1930s, so that is almost a century old. So the reality is that a lot of the major Middle Eastern fragrance brands have actually been around for a while, a lot longer than people actually realize and give them credit for. The second interesting and less known fact that I'm going to tell you about in today's video has to do with the actual products and the fact that a lot of people actually think that brands like Latafa, like Al Haramain, like Ajmal and Rasasi, they only do clone fragrances, but the reality is that they actually have some of their own creations. For example, I can show you a fragrance from the brand of Rasasi which is called Shura, and this is an original creation from the brand of Rasasi. It's a very interesting fragrance that smells very Middle Eastern, and this is a unique creation from the brand of Rasasi. I can give you just quickly another example that comes from the brand of Ajmal, and it's called Ambre Pimente, and this is again another unique creation that comes from the brand of Ajmal, that is not copying anything else out there, and it's been created by Ajmal themselves. So a lot of people think that Middle Eastern clone brands only make clones, but the reality is that they actually have their original creations as well. A less known fact, number 3, will be the fact that Middle Eastern clone brands actually don't always try to create a straight up clone of something out there. More often than not, they will actually put a sort of a twist, something that we call a twist, or they add some sort of an addition to the scent profile of the original fragrance that their products have been inspired by. I'm just going to give you a quick example from the brand of Latafa. I'm holding Al Nashama Caprice, and this fragrance has been very heavily inspired by Lannoy de L'Homme Blue Electric, but this is not a straight up clone of Lannoy de L'Homme Blue Electric. This feels, for example, a lot more woodier. This feels a lot more powdery than the original fragrance. And there are countless examples of that. Another example will be Latafa Assad, which of course is a clone of Dior Sauvage Elixir. Well, it's not a straight up clone. It feels less spicy than Sauvage Elixir. It feels sweeter, more vanillic. In general, more wearable version of Sauvage Elixir. So more often than not, more often than people actually realize, Middle Eastern fragrance brands actually are cloning original designer and niche scents, but they like to put their own twist on the scent profile. Less known fact number 4 will have to do with the performance. Now again, quite a lot more often than people actually realize, clone fragrances that are made in the Middle East actually outperform the original scents that they have been inspired by. And again, I'm going to point back to Al Nashama Caprice, which again is a clone of Lannoy de L'Homme Blue Electric. And this actually is stronger than Lannoy de L'Homme Blue Electric. It lasts for a longer time, it projects better, and there are a lot more examples again for something like this. You can take something like Club de Nuit Intense Man from Armaf, which is a clone, of course, of Creed Aventus, and it definitely outperforms current formulations of Creed Aventus without any problem. I can also give you another quick example off the top of my head, again from Latafa, Kite Intense, which is a clone of Givenchy Gentleman Reserve Privé. The Latafa clone again is stronger, lasts longer and projects better than the original fragrance from Givenchy. So quite more often than people actually realize, Middle Eastern clone brands and their creations actually outperform the original scents that they have been inspired by. Fun fact number 5 will be the fact that Middle Eastern fragrance brands actually are starting to employ or use the services of famous perfumers out there, so they no longer can be associated with simply doing clone fragrances. And a very stark example of that will be the way that Latafa, the fact that Latafa have started working with Quentin Bish, Mr. Quentin Bish, who's probably right now the most popular perfumer out there, and they've already created a few interesting scents together, you know, Quentin Bish with Latafa. So in my opinion, this will be the case more and more often as in the near future, especially because, you know, Middle Eastern fragrance brands, they are becoming more popular, they're making bigger sales, bigger profits, they can afford to spend more money and actually work with real perfumers instead of just simply going out there and trying to copy a certain scent. So more often than not, you're actually going to start to see more original creations that come from the Middle Eastern brands that are actually created by famous perfumers. Fact number 6, less known fact number 6, will have to do with the actual cloning of the fragrances. Now, a lot of people who have been in the fragrance game for only a couple of years may think that, the whole cloning fragrance thing was actually invented by the Middle Eastern brands, but the reality is a lot different. The reality is that even designer and niche brands like to clone each other, not in the straight up sense of that we use, the sense of that word that we use when it comes to Middle Eastern clone brands, but they like to draw heavy inspirations from one another. There are quite a few, niche fragrances out there that have been inspired by designer scents, in some cases by even very cheap, very affordable scents. So the reality is that the whole cloning thing, the whole cloning fragrance thing actually has been around for a while, and it's actually practiced by even famous designer and niche brands out there. Last known fact number 7 will have to do with the actual cost of the fragrances and why Middle Eastern fragrance brands can afford to sell their fragrances at a lot lower prices compared to designer and niche scents. Now, in my opinion, there are two main reasons for that. The first one has to do with the marketing. Designer and niche brands, especially designer brands, the way that they like to present their fragrances is by paying famous people to present and to basically make advertisements for their scents. For example, they'll pay a lot of money to actors, to singers, to a lot of those famous people out there, to what we call celebrities, and that takes a huge investment. Also, they like to pay for a lot of advertisements. When it comes to, they like to advertise their products on newspapers, on the TV, all over the internet. So advertisements and the whole marketing thing takes quite a lot of investment, and that investment has to be priced in the price of the actual end price of the fragrances. The second main reason, in my opinion, why Middle Eastern fragrance brands can actually afford to sell their fragrances at a lot lower cost will have to do with research and development. Again, designer and niche scents, they have to invest a lot of money, they have to pay famous perfumers out there so that they would create the scents for them, and again, that takes a lot of resources, that takes a lot of money. And when it comes to Middle Eastern fragrance brands, in a lot of the cases, they actually draw inspiration from product that's already been created, and that lowers their research and development costs dramatically. And that's the second main reason why Middle Eastern fragrance brands can afford to sell their products at a lot lower price compared to designer and niche brands. And a less known fact number 8, maybe nowadays is not so less known, it's more well known, is the fact that Middle Eastern fragrance brands are actually taking over the fragrance industry, the fragrance market. Whether you like it or not, Middle Eastern fragrance brands are becoming more and more popular with each day. They are making more and more products, and the other good thing is that they've actually improved their quality quite a bit in the past few years, and they're starting to become a real threat for designer and niche brands out there. So again, whether you like it or not, Middle Eastern fragrance brands are probably going to change the way that we think about fragrances in the future, because they offer nice quality, they offer good performance and all that for a lot lower price compared to their designer and niche opposition. So guys, in today's video I shared with you 8 less known facts about Middle Eastern fragrance brands. I hope that you found this video interesting to watch. If you did, give it a like, and I also hope that you're going to join me tomorrow for your daily dose of some fragrance content. And until then, stay safe and bye bye.